Good day, students. This is teacher Shilpa Adkar. Today, we'll be doing chapter 4.2, the luncheon. Let us begin with reading the lesson, the luncheon. William Somerset Maugham was a distinguished British playwright, novelist, and a short story writer. He was among the most popular writers of his era and reputedly the highest paid author during the 1930s. His work is characterized by a clear, unadorned style, cosmopolitan settings, and a shrewd understanding of human nature. Unadorned over here means plain or simple. Cosmopolitan means global or universal, and shrewd over here means sharp. A most delightfully humorous narrative, The Luncheon, is a slice of life story about Mom's luncheon date proposed to him by a woman whom he hopes is a supporter of his art. Let's read. I caught sight of her at the play, and in answer to her call, I went over during the interval and sat down beside her. It was long since I had seen her, and if someone had not mentioned her name, I hardly think I would have recognized her. She addressed me brightly. Well, it's many years since we first met. How time fly how does sorry, how time does fly. We are none of us getting any younger. Do you remember the first time I saw you? You asked me to luncheon. Luncheon means a formal lunch. Did I remember? It was 20 years ago and I was living in Paris. I had a tiny apartment and I was earning barely enough money. She had read a book of mine and had written to me about it. I answered, thanking her, and presently I received from her another letter saying she was passing through Paris and would like to have a chat with me. But her time was limited, and the only free moment she had was on the following Thursday. And would I give her a little luncheon at Foyos afterwards? Foyos is a restaurant, and it was so far beyond my means that I had never even thought of going there. I had 80 francs to last me the rest of the month, and a modest luncheon should not cost more than 15. If I cut out coffee for the next 2 weeks, I could manage very well. Cut out coffee is to sacrifice having coffee or not have coffee for the next 2 weeks. Over here, the writer says that he caught sight of an old acquaintance at a play that he had attended. They met during the interval. The writer was seeing her after a long time and would not have recognized her if someone had not mentioned her name. The woman spoke to him with joy. She was very happy to have met him and asked the writer if he remembered the luncheon that they had had years ago after they first met. The writer had found it very difficult to forget that particular luncheon, which was in Paris 20 years ago, and he presents us with a flashback. The writer lived in a tiny apartment and was barely earning enough money for himself. The woman had read a book of the writer and appreciated it. She mentioned that she was passing through Paris and was only free on a Thursday. She asked if the writer was free to take her for lunch at Foyer's. Luncheon at the restaurant Foyer's was something the writer could not afford. He had 80 gold francs to last him for the rest of the month. He thought that a decent lunch should be approximately 15 francs. So he calculated that if he did not drink coffee for 2 weeks, he could manage with the remaining amount of money for the rest of the month. Let's continue reading. I answered that I would meet my friend at Foyer's on Thursday at 12:30. She was, in appearance, imposing rather than attractive. Imposing means impressive. And she gave me the impression of having more teeth, white and large, and even, than they were necessary for any practical purpose. She was talkative, but since she seemed to want to talk about me, I was prepared to be an attentive listener. I was startled. Startled means shocked when the menu was brought, for the prices were a great deal higher than I had thought. But she reassured me. I never eat anything for luncheon, she said. Oh, don't say that, I answered generously. I never eat more than one thing. I think people eat for far too much nowadays. A little fish, perhaps. I wonder if they have any salmon. Well, it was early in the year for salmon and it was not on the menu. But I asked the waiter if there was any. Yes, a beautiful salmon had just come in. It was the first that they had. I ordered it for my guest. The waiter asked her if she would have something while it was being cooked. No, she answered. I never eat more than one thing. Unless you had a little caviar. I never mind caviar. Caviar is a dish which is made out of fish eggs. I knew I could not afford caviar, but I could not very well tell her that. For myself, I chose the cheapest dish on the menu, and that was mutton chop. I think you're unwise to eat meat, she said. I don't believe in overloading my stomach. Let's understand this. The writer agreed to meet the woman at Foyer's on Thursday at 12:30. He imagines a graceful and beautiful lady would meet him. But when the writer met her, he found her impressive rather than attractive. The writer felt that she had more teeth in her mouth than necessary. The woman liked to talk, and the writer was ready to be an attentive listener. When the menu was brought to them, the high prices shocked the writer. But the woman reassured the writer that she never ate anything for lunch. The writer generously requested her to have something. The woman replied that she never ate more than one thing and thought that people eat far too much than necessary. She agreed to have a little salmon if they had some. As it was early in the year for salmon to be available, it was not on the menu. But on inquiry, they were told that a beautiful catch of salmon had just come in. The writer ordered it for the guest. Now, the waiter asked if the woman would like to have something while the salmon was being cooked. She answered in negative, but also said that she didn't mind having a little caviar, that is, a dish made out of fish eggs. The writer knew that he couldn't afford it, but he also could not reveal that to the guest. So caviar was also ordered for the guest. The writer chose the cheapest dish on the menu, which was a mutton chop. The woman was of the opinion that it was unwise to eat meat and overload one's stomach. Let's continue reading. She ate the caviar and ate the salmon. She talked gaily of art and literature and music. But I wondered what the bill would come to. When my mutton chop arrived, she took me quite seriously to task. To take to task is to scold or reprimand. I see that you are in the habit of eating a heavy luncheon. I'm sure it's a mistake. Why don't you follow my example and just eat one thing? I couldn't possibly eat anything more unless they had some of those giant asparagus. Asparagus are shoots which are used as a vegetable. I should be sorry to leave Paris without having some of them. My heart sank. The heart sinking is to feel terrible, a little scared. I had seen them in the shops and I knew that they were horribly expensive. My mouth had often watered at the sight of them. I'm not in the least hungry, my guest sighed. But if you insist, I don't mind having some asparagus. I ordered them. Aren't you going to have any? No, I never eat asparagus. Let's understand this. As the woman ate the caviar and then the salmon, their conversation revolved around art, literature, and music. The one thing on the writer's mind was what the amount on the bill would be. When the writer's mutton chop was brought to the table, the woman scolded him severely for eating the unhealthy dish. She was sure that he was making a mistake, eating a heavy lunch. The woman advised the writer to follow her example and eat just one thing. She included that she couldn't eat anything more unless they had some giant asparagus, which are shoots of a plant which are used as a vegetable. The woman added that she would be sorry to leave Paris without having some. The writer got another shock as he knew that asparagus was extremely expensive. He himself could never afford to buy any, though his mouth watered at their sight. The woman shamelessly said that she was not hungry at all, but wouldn't mind having some asparagus if the writer insisted. So the writer was forced to order some asparagus for the guest. When asked by the woman if he was not interested in having any, the writer replied that he never ate asparagus. Let's continue reading. We waited for the asparagus to be cooked. Panic seized me. It was not a question now of how much money I should have left over for the rest of the month, but whether I had enough to pay the bill. It would be mortifying to find myself 10 francs short and be obliged to borrow from my guest. Mortifying is to be embarrassing or humiliating. I knew exactly how much I had, and if the bill came to more, I made up my mind that I would put my hand in my pocket and with a dramatic cry start up and say it had been picked. Of course, it would be awkward if she had not money enough either to pay the bill. Then the only thing would be to leave my watch and say I would come back and pay later. The asparagus appeared. I watched her thrust them down her throat in large mouthfuls. To thrust them down the throat is to eat hurriedly. At last, she finished. Coffee, I said. Yes, just an ice cream and coffee, she answered. I was past caring now, so I ordered coffee for myself and an ice cream and coffee for her. Let's understand. While both were waiting for the asparagus to be cooked, the writer was terrified. Now, he was not worried about how he would manage his expenses for the rest of the month. He was worried whether he would have sufficient money to pay the restaurant bill. The writer was afraid that it would be terribly humiliating if he fell short of money and would be forced to borrow from his guest. The writer decided to make up a dramatic story that his pocket had been picked. But he also realized that it would be very awkward if the woman also did not have enough money to pay the bill. The writer made a firm decision that if a situation like that came up, he would leave his watch at the restaurant as security and return back to pay later. When all these thoughts were running in the writer's mind, the asparagus came, and the guest finished them off hurriedly. The writer then asked courteously if the guest would like to have some coffee. The woman jumped at the offer and said she would like to have just an ice cream and coffee. The writer did not care about anything now and ordered a coffee for himself as well. Let's continue reading. You know, there's one thing I thoroughly believe in, she said, as she ate the ice cream. One should always get up from a meal feeling one could eat a little more. Are you still hungry? I asked faintly. Oh no, I'm not hungry. You see, I don't eat luncheon. I have a cup of coffee in the morning and then dinner. But I never eat more than one thing for luncheon. I was speaking for you. Oh, I see. Then a terrible thing happened. While we were waiting for the coffee, the head waiter came up to us bearing a large basket full of peaches. But surely peaches were not in season then. Lord knew what they cost. I knew a little later, for my guest, going on with her conversation, absent-mindedly took one. You see, you filled your stomach with a lot of meat, my one miserable little chop, and you can't eat any more. But I've just had a snack, and I shall enjoy a peach. Let's understand. As the guest ate the ice cream, she said that she firmly believed that one should always get up from a meal feeling that one could eat a little more. She meant that one should not stuff oneself with food. The writer asked if the guest was still hungry. She replied that she was concerned about the writer and speaking for him, not about herself. She was clear that she did not eat lunch ever. She had a cup of coffee in the morning and then straight dinner. She said that she never had more than one thing for lunch. When the writer and the guest were waiting for the coffee, the head waiter approached them with a large basket of huge peaches. The writer realized that they would be pretty expensive as they were not in season then. He became aware of the cost immediately when the guest very casually picked up one of the peaches from the basket. The justification the woman gave was that the writer had filled his stomach with a lot of meat and therefore could not enjoy anything more, whereas she had had just a snack and could enjoy a peach also. Let's continue reading. The bill came, and when I paid for it, I found that I had only enough for an inadequate tip. Inadequate is insufficient. Her eyes rested for an instant on the 3 francs I left for the waiter, and I knew that she thought me mean. But when I walked out of the restaurant, I had the whole month before me and not a penny in my pocket. Follow my example, she said as we shook hands, and never eat more than one thing for luncheon. I'll do better than that, I retorted. To retort is to answer sharply or angrily. I'll eat nothing for dinner tonight. And this he told very sarcastically. Humorist, she cried gaily, jumping into a cab. You are quite a humorist. Humorist is either a joker or a funny man. I have had my revenge at last. I do not believe that I am a vindictive man. Vindictive is revengeful or unforgiving. Vindictive means revengeful or unforgiving. But when the gods take a hand in the matter, it is understandable to observe the result with satisfaction. Take a hand in the matter is to get involved. Today, she weighs 21 stone. 21 stone is nearly 133 kg. Let's understand this. After the writer and his guest were done with their lunch, the bill came to their table. The writer, on seeing the amount, realized that he had enough money to pay the bill, but he did not have sufficient money for the tip. He kept only 3 francs as a tip and left the restaurant. When the tip was being kept on the table, the guest noticed the small amount. The writer guessed that the guest might have thought of him to be mean to keep such a small tip, as she did not know about the writer's financial condition. When the writer walked out of the restaurant after lunch, he did not have a single penny with him and an entire month before him. When both the writer and his guest were parting, she advised him to follow her example and never eat more than one thing for lunch. The writer, who was already upset with the whole episode, answered sharply that he could do something better than following the guest, and that would be skipping dinner that night. Getting into a cab, the woman called the writer a humorist or a funny man for his sarcastic answer. Now, when the writer met her after nearly 20 years, he seemed to have had his revenge. He clarified that he was not an unforgiving or revengeful person, but was secretly happy that the woman weighed 21 stone, that is nearly 133 kgs today. It was the writer's understanding that when the gods decide to get involved in any matter, it is sure that the result is always satisfactory. Thus, the personality and obese structure of the woman brought great satisfaction to the writer. The theme of this story is appearance versus reality. In this chapter, the writer, Mom, shows us his sense of humor and a sharp understanding of human nature. He uses humor and irony to depict the character of the woman. The woman just pretended to eat only one thing for lunch, but ate the most expensive things available on the menu, while the poor writer had only a mutton chop. After the luncheon, the guest advised the writer to follow her example and eat healthy. Irony is presented here in a stressed form. It proves that flattery and pride hampered the young man's ability to be truthful with his guests. We have come to the end of this chapter. I hope all of you have enjoyed this story and definitely have some anecdotes of your own. Please go through the textual questions and write the answers. This is your assignment. Now, write question number 13. Question number 13 is an informal letter. Please write that on a foolscap paper. Please do the grammar assignment in your grammar notebook. Your grammar assignment is given over here. Please do it in your grammar notebook only. Thank you.